I stood there, my blue satin sash draped over my black graduation gown, holding the diploma I'd worked 4 long years to earn. It was supposed to be the proudest night of my life, but as the champagne bubbles tickled my nose, my brother Grant stood up, tapping his glass with a silver spoon. "A toast," he sneered, his voice cutting through the laughter like a cold blade. "To Sloane, who thinks she's a self-made woman." Before I could even blink, he grabbed my diploma from my hand and with a sickening crunch, ripped the parchment right in half. My heart stopped. He wasn't finished. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a folded document, sliding it across the white tablecloth like a debt collector. "Invoice for professional mentoring, $155,000, Grant announced. "Every connection I made, every hour I wasted guiding your career, now pay up." I looked at my father, Trevor, expecting him to shut this madness down. Instead, he just took a slow sip of his drink. "Business is business, Sloane," he muttered. My mother, Beatrice, wouldn't even meet my eyes. They weren't celebrating my success. They were liquidating it. But as I looked at that bill, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I looked at Grant's smug smile and realized he'd made a fatal accounting error. He thought he was cashing out. He had no idea he was actually handing me the fuse to his own destruction. Quickly subscribe to Prime Karma Stories and tell me in the comments, would you ever pay back a sibling who treated you like this? To understand why Grant thought he could own my future, you have to understand the reality of being the invisible daughter in the Dixon household. Growing up, Grant was the golden boy. My parents didn't just support him, they worshipped him. When he went to university, Trevor bought him a luxury SUV and paid for a high-rise apartment in the city. Grant never had to worry about a bill or a budget. But when my turn came, suddenly, the family bank was bone dry. "The market is down, Sloane," Beatrice would sigh, her fingers sparkling with a new diamond ring. I spent my university years working double shifts at a greasy diner, the smell of old fries stuck in my hair while I memorized complex corporate law. I was the one who paid for my textbooks, my gas, and every single credit hour out of my own pocket. Grant didn't mentor me. He was too busy partying on Trevor's dime, only calling me when he needed me to ghostwrite his business assignments so he wouldn't flunk out. I did it because I was raised to believe that family loyalty was a sacred bond. I thought if I worked twice as hard as him, I'd finally earn my father's respect and prove I was worth more than Grant's leftovers. I thought my degree was my ticket to freedom. I didn't realize that in my family, my success wasn't a source of pride. It was a target. Grant watched me land a high-paying job at a top firm, and instead of admiration, he felt a bitter, calculated greed. He had been handed everything his whole life, and now he decided he was entitled to the one thing he didn't build, my career. He waited until my graduation night to strike, thinking I was still that same desperate girl who would do anything for family. He thought he could bankrupt my spirit, but he forgot one thing. I was already an expert at spotting a fraud. The ballroom was dripping in crystal and fake smiles, a lavish celebration that my parents somehow found the budget for, even after telling me they couldn't help with my tuition for 4 years. I stood there, clutching the jagged remains of my ripped diploma, feeling the weight of 200 sets of eyes boring into me. The silence was suffocating. I looked at Beatrice, my mother, her face as cold as the marble floors beneath her designer heels. "Grant is right, Sloane," she whispered, her voice carrying just enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "We gave you life, but your brother gave you his precious time and expertise. It's only fair you compensate him now that you're making the big bucks. We don't raise daughters who take without giving back." I felt a physical wave of nausea. This wasn't a celebration. It was a public execution. Grant had planned this moment perfectly, waiting until I was at my most vulnerable to spring his trap. He leaned back in his chair, swirling a vintage scotch that cost more than my monthly rent, looking like a mid-level mob boss who had just taxed his most annoying subject. "Come on, sis," he smirked. "Don't be the family's leech. $155,000 is a bargain for the mentorship I provided. Think of it as a professional courtesy. Trevor, my father, finally leaned in, his voice booming with a terrifying, business-like finality. "We've reviewed the line items, Sloan. We agree with your brother's assessment. You've had a free ride for far too long, and it's time to settle the books. If you don't sign that acknowledgement of debt right now, don't bother coming home for the holidays. In fact, consider yourself erased from this family. We don't have room for thieves." This was the ultimate family betrayal. My own parents weren't just siding with my brother. They were acting as his enforcers. They wanted to strip me of my hard-earned independence before I could even taste it. I looked around the room. The neighbors were whispering, and some were even filming. They saw a girl about to break. But as my hand reached for the pen Grant was holding out, my mind shifted. I wasn't a scared girl anymore. I was a professional trained to dismantle corrupt systems. I looked at the invoice again. It wasn't just a bill. It was a paper trail of every lie my brother had ever told. This was the seed of family karma, and I was about to plant it. I wasn't the one who would be crying by the end of the week. I didn't sign it with a shaky hand. I signed it with a smile, because I knew something they didn't. You should never hand a professional auditor a list of your illegal expenses. I checked into a hotel downtown, using the last of my savings to buy the one thing my family had stolen: silence. For 3 days, I lived in a world of cold marble and fluorescent lights, watching my phone vibrate until the screen went dark. The messages from Grant were a masterclass in family betrayal. He wasn't a brother anymore. He was a debt collector. "I've already spoken to a lawyer, Sloan," one text screamed. "If the first installment of that $155,000 isn't in my account by Friday, I'm calling your new boss. Let's see how they like hiring a thief." Then came the final blow. An email from Trevor. It was a formal notice to vacate my childhood room, demanding a storage fee for the boxes of books I'd left behind. They were trying to erase me, piece by piece, thinking the pressure would leave me crying on their doorstep, begging for a place to belong. But as I stared at that invoice, something in me snapped. The loyal daughter died in that hotel room, and the auditor was born. I realized that in his rush to humiliate me, Grant had done the unthinkable. He had put his financial lies in writing. He thought he was trapping me with a debt, but he was actually handing me a roadmap to his own fraud. The hunt was on, and little did they know, I was about to turn their golden boy into a federal case. I didn't go to a therapist to process my heartbreak. I went to a glass-walled office on the 40th floor to process a takedown. I sat across from Mr. Henderson, my mentor, and a man who had spent 30 years dismantled corporate frauds. I laid Grant's invoice for existence on the mahogany desk, alongside a printout of his latest business tax filings. Henderson didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. He just adjusted his glasses and leaned into the light. "Look here, Sloan," Henderson said, his voice dropping into that low, dangerous register he used before a deposition. "Your brother is more than just arrogant. He's sloppy. He's billing you $155,000 for professional mentoring, on dates where he was simultaneously drawing a government-subsidized salary for a startup he claimed had zero revenue. He's trying to collect personal debt for services he already reported as tax-deductible corporate expenses." The realization hit me like a shot of adrenaline. Grant hadn't just committed a family betrayal. He had handed me a written confession of wire fraud and tax evasion. He was so desperate to humiliate me that he documented his own money laundering scheme. He thought he was putting a leash on me, but he had actually handed me the keys to his prison cell. Trevor and Beatrice were so blinded by their golden boy that they hadn't realized their pride and joy was a federal liability. We didn't need a miracle. We just needed an audit. By the time we finished the paperwork, I knew Grant wouldn't be demanding a check. He'd be begging for mercy. The silence from my family didn't just break, it exploded. 2 weeks after Mr. Henderson and I filed that whistleblower report, the carefully constructed facade of the Golden Boy didn't just crack, it disintegrated into dust. I was sitting in my corner office, the one I'd earned with years of sweat and those exhausting double shifts, when my assistant, Maya, buzzed me with a look of genuine concern. "There's a man in the lobby, Sloan. He claims to be your brother, but he's making a scene. Should I call security?" I didn't hesitate. I straightened my blazer and walked out to the reception area. There stood Grant. The transformation was staggering. The tailored tuxedo was gone. He looked like a man who had been running for his life. His expensive shirt was wrinkled. His hair was a mess, and he was clutching a tattered folder, as if it were a life jacket in a storm. When his eyes met mine, he didn't sneer. He didn't reach for a laser pointer or a spreadsheet. He looked at me with a hollow, panicked stare that made my stomach turn. "Sloan, you have to help me," he gasped, his voice cracking so loudly the entire lobby could hear. "The feds, they swarmed the office this morning. They froze every single account. They towed the SUV right out of the driveway. They even put a seal on the condo. Trevor and Beatrice, they're hysterical. The bank is calling in the notes on the house because the business was the guarantor. They're saying it's my fault, Sloan. They're saying I'm the one who ruined the family. I didn't offer him a chair. I didn't offer him a glass of water. I stood there with the cold, professional detachment of an auditor watching a failing firm collapse. This was the ultimate family betrayal turning into family karma. The very invoice he had weaponized to humiliate me had been his own confession. By trying to claim my income as his own, he had triggered a red flag audit that exposed a decade of his financial rot. He had been so focused on stealing my future that he forgot he was standing on a trap door of his own making. "I need a job, Sloan," he whispered, and then the unthinkable happened. He started crying. Right there, in front of my colleagues and my staff, the man who tried to bankrupt my spirit was sobbing for a paycheck. He clearly regretted everything, but I just don't hire lying family frauds. "Grant," I said, my voice steady and cold, "I don't hire people with a history of financial fraud. It's bad for the company culture." I watched the realization sink in. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was a liability. He walked out of my lobby, his shoulders slumped in total defeat, headed back to a home that was currently being appraised for a foreclosure sale. Trevor and Beatrice were forced to trade their luxury estate for a cramped 2-bedroom rental, finally living on the poverty wages they had lied about to the IRS for years. They reached out, of course. My mother sent a desperate email asking for a family loan to help them get back on their feet. I didn't reply. I simply forwarded the message to Mr. Henderson and went back to my meeting. For years, I lived under the suffocating belief that I owed them my life. I thought I was a permanent burden, a debt that could never truly be settled. But Grant's greed was the greatest gift he ever gave me. By trying to put a price tag on my existence, he accidentally allowed me to pay it off and walk away forever. I don't carry the heavy weight of their expectations anymore. I don't look for my name in their twisted ledger. I am Sloan, and my worth isn't measured by a fake invoice. I built my own empire from the ashes of their family betrayal. Karma didn't just find them, it audited them. And in the end, the Dixons were found completely bankrupt of any real value. It was time to close this chapter and never look back.